of Life, a show about Jewish books, music, film, and web. I'm Heidi Estrin. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida. Additional support comes from the Association of Jewish Libraries. A Yiddish proverb says, "What soap is to the body, laughter is to the soul." In this September 2008 episode, we lather up with the picture book Sarah Laughs by Jacqueline Jules and the self-help book We Plan, God Laughs by Rabbi Sherry Hirsch. We'll also take a serious look at the handwriting of our guests with the help of graphologist Arlen Imberman. By the way, I want you to know that the Book of Life has joined the Big Tent Judaism Coalition. This is an umbrella group for communal Jewish institutions that strive to be inclusive and welcoming, like Abraham and Sarah in the Bible, whose big tent was open on all four sides to let guests enter. The Book of Life became a Big Tent member to show our commitment to exploring Judaism from new angles and to educating and welcoming a wide variety of listeners. The Big Tent Judaism Coalition is run by the Jewish Outreach Institute. Check out their website at joi.org/bigtent. Now, on with the show. Jacqueline Jules is an author, poet, and librarian who has written many Jewish children's books, including the classics Once Upon a Shabbos and The Hardest Word. She recently began a series of Bible picture books, which have received recognition from the Association of Jewish Libraries and the Greenspoon Foundation's PJ Library. I spoke to her about the latest book in the series, Sarah Laughs, by phone at her home in Northern Virginia. Jacqueline, tell us about your Bible picture book series.
The first book was Abraham's Search for God, and the second book is Sarah Laughs. The Abraham book is a midrash about the childhood of Abraham, and Sarah Laughs continues the story of Abraham through the eyes of his wife, Sarah. The third book in this series will be released in March of 2009. It's Benjamin and the Silver Goblet, and it's the story of Joseph and his brothers through the eyes of Benjamin, the youngest brother. That's the third in the story. I've just finished Miriam. It's the story of Miriam through the eyes of Bezalel, watching her in the desert and the miracles in the desert and culminating in Sinai. I'm very excited about this series in that I think the illustrations are just gorgeous. I love the design and everything.
You've started with Abraham and Sarah. Are you going to go straight through and do all the matriarchs and patriarchs?
It's kind of interesting how all this started. I wrote the story about Abraham actually in 2001. I was working as a Judaica librarian and teaching, doing Tat Shabbat and doing story times with Jewish preschoolers, and one of the preschool teachers came in and said, I need a book about Abraham. I said, well, let me see if I can find something for you. And I couldn't find anything that was fairly recent. Everything was really pretty old and not nicely illustrated and also way too long for preschoolers. And I'm a storyteller. And frequently when I was teaching, if I couldn't find a book that I wanted to read to the kids, I would find a midrash and do my own version of it. And that's how Abraham started as one of the midrashes I was telling in my preschool story times. Then in 2005, Judy Groner from Carbon said that they were interested in starting a Bible series. And I said, well, hey, there's this story I tell to my kids, and so I sent it to her. When I first wrote the story, and the chorus was always the same, it was, one God of earth and skies, you fill my heart and eyes. But Judy realized that if we changed the chorus each time, we would be building. And so first the chorus says, oh, moon that lights the sky. And then the second time it's, oh, sun that lights the skies. And so in the end, when he says, one God of earth and skies, there's really a real resonance.
In your most recent book, Sarah Laughs, I feel like you've done a particularly good job of bringing Sarah to life and making her feel like a real person. What was it about Sarah that you connected with personally as you were writing this story?
Well, to research these books, I spent a lot of time with Louis Ginsburg works and the classic tales by Ellen Frankel. And the more midrash you read about Bible characters, the more they come to life. And that's how they came to life for me. We don't always think through the eyes of the matriarchs. We think the stories are primarily about the patriarch. So it was fascinating and invigorating to imagine this time period through the eyes of Sarah, aided with what I had learned about her through the Louis Ginsburg tales. I mean, a lot of them talk about how beautiful she was, and that certainly increases one's fascination.
I wanted to ask you about that. You have an interesting author's note at the back of Sarah Laughs about how you researched Sarah's personality, so to speak. Can you tell us more about that research?
Another source I used a lot is Biblical Images by Adam Steinsaltz. The other thing that connected with me so much about Sarah is that Sarah was a true partner in everything her husband did. And I really thought that that was wonderful, showing that she worked alongside him and that she taught others about the one true God. And the image of portraying a partnership in a marriage was very appealing to me.
Jacqueline, you've written many different picture books. My favorite one of your books that we have to talk about is Once Upon a Shabbos. I love that book. Tell us how you came up with that story.
Well, Once Upon a Shabbos, that one is like, you talk about participation. Honey, honey, sweet as Shabbos. Honey, honey, sweet as Shabbos. I mean, by the time we're done doing that, everybody's singing, even the grown-ups. And they're all saying, "Are you my sugar?" I love it because there's so much in that you can participate in. There's a story called Sodi Saleratus that I was doing with the kids at my school, and they just loved it. And I said, I really want a fun Jewish story that I can do with my Tot Shabbat kids that they would like just as much, and that they would be able to join in, and that would promote the joy of Shabbos and the joy of celebrating and hospitality and all of that. So is there some way I could make Sodi Saleratus Jewish? Well, if you made it really Jewish, you'd put it in Brooklyn, I decided. So I put it in Brooklyn. Well, if we said it in Brooklyn, we needed to have some Yiddish language. So, I mean, then I've changed the characters. I have the Bubby and the Zadie. In Sodi Saleratus, the bear eats everybody. And I'm like, I can't do that. I can't do that with my preschoolers and their parents on Shabbos morning. That's not going to work. So how could I change that? You could have that the bear scared them. What could you do in the end? And you make friends with the bear. The mitzvah of hospitality. I grew up with that. So when Bubby the Balabusta makes friends and shows that mitzvah, to me that's a lot of fun.
Jacqueline, what's next for you?
Well, at the same time that The Princess and the Ziz is being released, a new board book called Goodnight Shema. It's a poem I wrote about a little boy getting ready for bed and how he says the Shema. Personally and creatively, I love to try new things, and this was exciting to me to work more in rhyme. I'm a writer, but I'm first a teacher. When somebody comes to me and they want a book, and it's not there, it's like, well, I want to make one for you. And so that has been the inspiration for a lot of my writing.
Jacqueline Jules, thanks so much for speaking with us.
Well, thank you so much for interviewing me. As a children's librarian, my favorite topic is always books, and certainly I like to talk about my own. So this is a great opportunity, and thank you so much.
Widely known as the relationship rabbi, Sherry Hirsch has reached audiences from the pulpit at Sinai Temple in Los Angeles on a number of television shows, and now through her book, We Plan, God Laughs, 10 Steps to Finding Your Divine Path When Life is Not Turning Out Like You Wanted. It's a no-nonsense book that's great for any reader, Jewish or not. I spoke to her by phone at her home in Los Angeles, California.
Sherry, before we get into the details of your book, tell us about the title, We Plan, God Laughs.
It actually comes from the Yiddish proverb, Montrach God lach, which my grandmother used to tell me all the time.
You offer 10 steps to finding your divine path when life is not turning out like you wanted. This sounds like a situation many people can relate to. Can you briefly summarize the 10 steps for us?
Sure, but the steps are meant to be revisited over and over again. They're not meant to be necessarily done in order. They're meant to be read and relearned and to be shared. So the first step is what happened, which is really about looking back. And it's funny that to step forward, you have to step back to look at actually who you are today based on your history. The second is ending the excuses. I'm sure you know there's a million excuses that we make. If only I was thinner, then I would go on Jade Aid. Things that we tell ourselves that prevent us from moving forward. The third step is getting present. It sounds so simple, and yet it's so hard because most of our daily life is lived in the past or in the future. 4 is celebrating the divine you. You know, it's interesting. So many people say to me, a family member dies, and they all rush to the funeral. But for the 7 weddings that preceded that funeral, they couldn't get the whole family together. And part of it is that we are very reluctant to celebrate, and even more reluctant to celebrate ourselves. And what I teach in that chapter is very much that we need to be celebrated the way that God celebrates us, the way that we celebrate our child when they come into the world at 7 pounds, that we're an extraordinary creation of God, and we need to see ourselves as such. The 5th is partnering with God. I think many people feel through especially difficult times that God is testing them, or that this is somehow supposed to make them stronger, or God just doesn't like them. And then the other thing that people say to me all the time is that God is too busy, right? There's people starving in Africa. There's a city to rebuild in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. How can God have time for me? God is much bigger than that. And so God does have time for you. 6 is recreating your Creator, which to me is in many ways the heart of the book, because many of us were presented an idea of God, and I use that word loosely because there's 70 different names for God in the Bible. But what they were taught, probably around the 3rd grade or so, was what has stayed with them. Because as they matured and as they were educated, did all these things that enhanced their cultural and intellectual life, their spiritual life stayed stagnant. And as a result, they're working with a 3rd grade God. And what I have come to understand is that not much from the 3rd grade is really working for me now, right? It really isn't. I mean, there's just not that much that I learned that year that I use on a regular basis. But the problem is we get stuck because we're working with that image that no longer speaks to us. And in fact, it moves us away from God as opposed to closer to God. 7 is finding your divine spark. The Kabbalists believe that there are divine shards or divine aspects of God within each one of us. Part of our challenge is to figure out what that divine shard is, right? Because it's fine to be told left and right, you are divine, you are divine. Mm-hmm. But if you're not even sure what that means, it's hard to feel that way on a regular basis. 8 is engaging up, which really comes from a phrase called settling down. Because just those 2 words, settle and down, made me cringe. A, why settle? And B, who wants to go down? Life is about going up. I mean, as Jews, our whole goal is to make aliyah, to move forward, to move up. And so I realized that engaging up was the opposite. It's the opposite of settling down. It's moving forward by taking action. 9 is finding meaning. And if you think about everything that gives you meaning, whether it's your children or your work or your family or your synagogue, those are the things that are enduring. Happiness is a byproduct of that. Happiness happens when we find meaning and we feel some goodness out of it. So what I hope to teach in that chapter is that meaning is a much greater value than happiness and will take you much farther. 10 is questioning. My hope is not that people go through the steps that are like, I drank the Kool-Aid and I'm 100% changed and my life is now miraculous, because it's not true. Part of it is that we question, we refine, we go back, we reassess, and then we discover, oh, wow, this is my authentic life and this is my real divine spark. And then the end of the book is called Laughing with God, which is that instead of feeling like God is laughing at us, we actually laugh with God, because, in fact, we're not only changing our lives, but we're changing the lives of everybody that we encounter. And I'll give you an example, and this is a dramatic one. But a woman that leaves an abusive marriage changes the future of her children and her children's children forever. You change not only your family history, but also you inspire all the people around you. We're not sentenced to live our life. We're actually given a choice to choose life. And our task is to embrace it, attack it, enjoy it, and ultimately laugh with God because of it. So that gives you a little rundown of the chapters.
That was a terrific summary of the whole book. I wanted to ask you about sort of a technique you use in the book. You cite many examples from the Torah that really bring the explanations to life. Can you give us a quick example of how people in the Bible enact the steps in your book?
Judaism is hard to access. We all know that. I mean, there's so much text and there's so much history and knowledge. There's just hard to break into it. And so a lot of telling the stories of the biblical characters is relatable, because they're relatable. Moshe was so imperfect. Here he was a reluctant leader. He had a stutter. He felt deeply unqualified, but what he did know is that he began to formulate a relationship with God, discover what his divine spark is, and ultimately brought meaning not only for himself, but for thousands. And I think it's so interesting because what makes him so relatable is how regular he is.
How have your own plans not turned out like you wanted? And how did you figure out the steps to finding your divine path?
Well, first of all, my plans on a daily basis aren't turning out like I planned. My kid did not get into kindergarten that we were hoping. So from that, small level, to my father dying at 58 and never getting to see his own grandchildren, right? My plans have never turned out like they planned. But what I started to realize was that when I stopped holding on to some constructed plan that was possibly outdated or didn't fit, I actually opened the door to find something far greater. And that gave me sort of the ideas for the steps. It was very organic. Literally, I had written the chapters, and I said, it's kind of like steps in a ladder to my editor. And he said, yeah, it's funny, there's exactly 10. And I was like, really? No. He said, yeah. And what's funny is the book itself was living out the 10 steps, because what was it that I really wanted to do and what excuses was I making? And I came to recognize what were my gifts and how I would partner with God to do something totally outside my perceived view of myself. I was always like, I can speak, but I can't write. And I learned that actually my gift was that I can communicate. My son is 5.5. Went to school recently, and you have to say what your parents do. He's like, my daddy's a doctor, my mommy's a writer. And so they're like, no, your mom's a rabbi. And he's like, no, she's not. She's a writer. And so it's also how you're affecting people around you,
That's so cool that, you lived the book as it was being created.
I really did live it.
You are your book.
Every single aspect. And then also, it's been a laugh with God. Do you know what I mean? Oh my God, I can't believe I wrote a book. It's like, and yet it's brought me tremendous meaning, tremendous fulfillment.
Sherry, thank you. This is great.
Well, Heidi, your pleasure. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
I really appreciate it.
to my baby, asking her to come on home. Sent a letter to my baby, begging her to come on home. Didn't get a letter back. I guess she don't write me no more.
Arlen Imberman is a graphologist and a corporate coach. Her book, Signature for Success, explains how we can analyze handwriting to learn about ourselves and the people around us. I asked Arlen to help Jacqueline, Sherry, and me to take a good look at our inner selves during the Jewish New Year. Be sure to stay tuned during the final credits to hear Jacqueline's and Sherry's responses to what Arlen had to say.
Arlen, what makes our handwriting so revealing?
What makes our handwriting revealing is it is really our unconscious on the page. It comes from our brain, which is why if we have a stroke, we can never, ever write the same way again. Versus if we have, let's say, a prosthesis, we can learn to write very much as we had written before it. Handwriting is really brain writing, and as I said in my book, body language on paper.
Your book, Signature for Success, is subtitled How to Analyze Handwriting and Improve Your Career, Your Relationships, and Your Life. How can graphology do all that?
I know, it sounds like a tremendous amount, doesn't it? Well, one of the ways it can do it is when you learn graphology, you learn how to connect to another person, not only to the way they appear to you, but to what they're thinking and feeling and fearing, to their mind and to their values. It goes beyond the mask of how we appear to each other every day. So that, for example, if you don't get along with someone, very often you might feel it must have something to do with you. As you learn about the writing of another person, you learn what makes them behave the way they do, what they might be expressing, what might have happened in their life long before they met you. It has nothing to do with you, and you can get out of the way of that and come to a different understanding and acceptance of them, rather than just reacting to them.
Can you give us a very brief example of what different styles of handwriting mean about the writer?
Well, there are 4 different connections in handwriting. You can actually learn how to identify the typology that a person taking the Myers-Briggs test reveals without taking the test. Jung invented the idea of extrovert and introvert, thinking person versus a feeling person, and a perceiving person, which is somebody who's very intuitive, versus a judging person, not judgmental, but very orderly and organized. This is all revealed in the writing pattern. The Garland connection, which is a very open connection of somebody, very often female, a mediator, a nurturer, somebody who hates conflict. Then there is what we call an arcade connection, which is the exact opposite. It's of somebody who's very formal, very closed to outside influences, very hard to know. The third one is what we call a thread, which is not so much a connection, but the absence of a connection. It looks like a thread, and people think, oh my goodness, that must be somebody who's very weak. Not at all. That's somebody who can see all sides of the situation, somebody who can be a chameleon, somebody who can be very diplomatic and go with the flow. And the fourth connection is a connection that most CEOs have, which we call an angle connection. It is the hardest to write. It requires the most pressure on the page, and it is a series of angles which indicate this is a person who doesn't adapt well. You've got to adapt to them. They love challenges. They love being told what they can't do to prove to you that you're wrong.
Does a person's ethnic background show in their handwriting in some way? Can you tell if a person is Jewish from their handwriting, if you know what to look for?
What you can tell from a person's handwriting is where they learn to write. You can also see if they're cultured, if they live for the world of the mind as compared to just action. It's very, very difficult to see a person's ethnicity. I have Martin Luther King's writing. I have Elie Wiesel's writing. I have the writing of religious leaders. But while you can see their values and while you can see what formed them, it's very difficult to see their ethnicity.
Is there some connection between this time of year, the Jewish high holidays, and graphology and what it reveals to us?
That is a wonderful question. Thank you for asking it. Writing is basically the way you feel at a particular moment, not a portrait so much as a snapshot. I don't know if you ever have kept writing from the past, and if you ever look at your writing of 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and see the tremendous difference that your writing reveals as you grow, as you mature. It's a wonderful way to also see things you might have hidden earlier in your life that you now feel more comfortable revealing. What most people don't realize about graphology is that it's a wonderful tool for self-discovery.
Let's get down to business. I sent you a handwriting sample, and I asked our other guests, Jacqueline Jules and Rabbi Sherry Hirsch, to send you samples as well.
I felt the closest of all three of you to Jacqueline. Her writing is very, very meticulous. She believes that if something is worth doing, it's worth doing well. She values self-control, and so her writing is very, very connected. Writing is divided into 3 zones. The upper zone is your intellect and your aspiration. It's like the sky. The middle zone is your ego, the way you deal with the world. It's like the horizon. And the lower zone is your instincts, your anger, your materiality, your sexuality. It's like the id or the ocean. It's there, it's deep, you can't see it, but it influences you nonetheless. And she has a very pronounced lower zone, which reveals a lot of complexity of experiences in her past. You can see creativity in her writing, and that's why I love to do the writing of writers. There's actually a stroke in their writing that reveals if they do have the capacity to write well. And, of course, Jackie has that. And her creativity is really like a release. It's a wonderful release, and I think it's a very good choice of career for her. And because of her space picture, which is wide, it's like a Henry Moore sculpture. What you don't write, the space you leave on the page, is as important as what you do write. She's capable of fine self-examination. She will take this time of year very seriously. And she channels this creatively into more insight and into more originality.
Let's go on to Sherry.
Sherry is another remarkable person. I wish she lived near me. I would like to join her congregation. She's very productive and very creative, and her use of space shows that she can listen and observe the world with a lot of emotional and mental clarity. There's a great deal of space. She doesn't overpower the page. She leaves space for other people to enter it and to listen to these other people. I talk about the 4 components of handwriting in my book, that it's form, movement, the color of the way you discharge the ink, and its space. Space is the hardest to master, and what we do last when we learn how to write. She's an original thinker. There is nothing in her handwriting that is school form, which means that she's broken away from the influences of her past. She's become her own person. She's reinvented herself. She has a lot of emotional intelligence and compassion. And just like Jackie, her temperament is perfectly suited to her field, the rabbinate. She's very unpretentious. She can tap the essence of another person, which is very rare and a great gift in a rabbi. She values authenticity. She can't bear anything that she thinks is pretentious. In her last name, her signature has extensions, both the E in Sherry and the H in Hirsch. That's a confirmation of her social skill, and that extension is an ability to connect to somebody else, to welcome the challenge of the future.
It's really interesting. The things that you're saying about Sherry and about Jacqueline fit in very well with what I know about them from reading their books. And I just wanted to ask you, you haven't read any of their writings, have you?
No, I haven't. I'd love to, but I don't know the titles of their books, and even if I had them, I wouldn't want to read it because I would want to come to this, with a completely fresh mind. But when we finish the interview, you'll have to tell me about their books so I can read them.
Amazing. Okay. All right. Well, I'm a little nervous, but now I'd like you to
No, don't
tell me about myself.
You will, I hope, tell me if you think I'm right, or if you hang up, I guess that means I was wrong, right?
No, I promise not to hang up.
Well, at least don't hang up till I finish.
Okay.
Now, you don't have a copy of what you sent me, do you?
Here it is.
Okay, if you look at the first sentence, which is thanks for agreeing to be on my podcast, look at the word agreeing. You see how you took the I dot and you connected it to the N without taking your hand off the page. You created a new letter. That is really impressive to a graphologist because that's an original letter form that you made yourself. That's being really creative and being expedient. It also shows that you have a very quick, smart mind and you know how to get to where you want to go. But you have a little bit of difficulty with authority, so you would prefer instead to be the authority than to have to report to an authority. And you've done it, so congratulations, you've done it.
Thank you.
You go your own way, but you know the world outside a bit better than the world inside you. You like it that way. And you channel your considerable energies into life, sometimes extravagantly, because you have a lot of enthusiasm, and you like to throw yourself into what you do. Some of the letters are angular, which we talked about earlier in the conversation. So that means sometimes you can be a bit impatient. It's difficult for you to suffer fools gladly. And yet, at the same time, you're a serial empathizer.
A serial empathizer?
Yeah. You can be extremely understanding and compassionate. I just wanted to say that you can like and dislike somebody by looking at them on a page. They come alive to you. And it's fun because often I've done the writing of someone and then I've met them. And I say, you look just like your handwriting.
And does it always come true that if you liked them on paper that you like them in person?
And the reverse as well, unfortunately.
All right. Well, Arlen Imberman, thanks so much for speaking with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I hope we'll have a chance to speak again. I've enjoyed it. Got me pegged. She was completely on target. I found it amazing that she could learn so many things about me from my writing, and I did especially like what she said about writing being a release for me. My husband was listening to it too, and he thought it was somebody who knew me who was talking about me.
Considering I was the most skeptical person of the sort of voodoo witchcraft of which I thought it was mind-blowing because every single aspect was so right on, and those are traits that are very unique to me, and I was just shocked, and I was more than pleasantly surprised. I was convinced and converted, as they say, and I'm ready to learn more about what I'm revealing through my handwriting.
The Book of Life is a podcast service of Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilachmakers Klezmer String Band at freilachmakers.com. PodSafe music in today's episode included Alphabet Song by Pidex from ccmixter.org and Letter by Davesky from podsafeaudio.com. Visit our podcast website at bookoflifepodcast.com or listen to the latest episode by phone at 916-313-3820. We welcome your comments and questions at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening and happy reading.